Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial, and this one's for crochet basic in the round slipper socks. And well, I've created this tutorial especially for that leftover yarn. So I'm using double knit or light worsted yarn, and it's a category 3 yarn. I'll be using a 4mm crochet hook and 2 stitch markers, a scissors, and yarn or wool needle. So this tutorial or this slipper sock is broken up into 4 parts just to make it a bit easier. We've got the ribbing right at the start, and then here the shaped part of the sock is our heel. And then we'll move on to the part 3, which is the body of our sock. And here you work as many rounds as need be in order to get to the beginning of the toe of the sock. And here with our 4th part, it's the toe of the sock. Again, it's just a repeat of those rounds to get to the end of the big toe. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Let's begin. Begin with a slip knot. So we'll be working the ribbing. Then it's chain 18. You can chain as many as you wish to here. It's just that you don't want to go too long, because once you get, like, you know that the size of the leg does increase as you get to the calf. So I'm just working this at the lower ankle. So chain 18, round 1, into the 3rd chain from the hook, half double crochet. So it's yarn over into that 3rd chain, 1, 2, 3, half double crochet. Continue with half double crochets to the end of the chain. I've completed round 1 working those half double crochets, and if you've started off with an initial chain of 18, you should have 17 stitches. I'm counting that turning chain, the 2 chains right at the start, as a stitch. So round 2, chain 2, 1, 2, and these chain 2s will count as a stitch and turn. So now we're working half double crochets, but we're working those half double crochets into the back loops. Here's the front loop, and on that side it's the back loop, in order to create that ribbing effect. We'll always not work a stitch into that first one, because that's where our chain 2 comes out of. So for round 2, it's into that stitch, the first stitch, which actually is the second because our chain 2 counts as a stitch. I'll work a half double crochet into the back loop. I'll continue with half double crochets into the back loops only to the end of the round. I'm at the end of round 2, and here I just need to bring this to your attention. Always, because we're counting our turning chain, that chain 2 as a stitch, we must always remember to work our last stitch into that 2nd chain from the turning chain. So here goes. At all times, make sure that your stitch count remains the same. So for round 1, I had 17 stitches. Round 2, I have 17 stitches. If you do not work into that turning chain, your pattern will go askew. So just be aware of that. I've completed the ribbing, and all I've done was repeat round 2. So at this point, The ribbing should fit comfortably around the upper ankle, and these two ends should come to a close. So work as many rounds of round 2 as need be in order for your ribbing to fit you comfortably. We'll now join the two ends together. So I've chosen to slip stitch the two ends together. You could, if you find seaming easier, you could go ahead and seam along the ends to bring them together. So here I'm just matching up the stitches along both ends to bringing them to get to a close with a slip stitch. Continue on to the end of the ribbing. The edges of my ribbing are seamed together, as you see here. We'll now continue on with the heel of the sock. So round 1, chain 1. So here, if you look closely, there aren't any actual stitches to follow. We'll work single crochets and we'll work them as evenly as possible. So what I'm doing is I'll just be working those single crochets into these little gaps that I see along the edge of the ribbing. Into that gap, insert the hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, and you'll continue with single crochets to the end of the round. Make certain that your stitches are evenly spaced. I'm at the end of round 1, and here right at the end, to complete the round, I'll slip stitch into that chain 1 that I had worked at the start. Round 2, chain 2, 1, 2. Here we'll be working half double crochets all across. So to work a half double crochet, it's yarn over, insert the hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through all 3 loops on the hook, and you continue with half double crochets to the end of the round. I've worked those half double crochets all across to end the round into that second chain from chain 2, which we had worked right at the start. I'll slip stitch to join. Round 3, chain 2, 1, 2. Round 3 is a repeat of round 2 where we work half double crochets all across. You'll continue with half double crochets to the end of the round. I've completed round 3 and I've slip stitched to join. Round 4 is an increase round. So here we'll chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And here we're working increases. So we'll work an increase into that first stitch, and an increase is working 2 stitches into 1 stitch. Here we're working double crochets. So it's yarn over, insert the hook into that stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, and we're working an increase, so it's 2 stitches into that first stitch. So that was our increase. Into the next stitch we'll work a double crochet, into the next stitch we'll work an increase. That's 2 stitches worked into 1 stitch. Into the next stitch we'll work a double crochet, into the next stitch we'll work an increase, so we've got our chain 3, an increase, double crochet, increase, double crochet, increase. Then I'll continue on with double crochets to the last 5 stitches, 1 2 3 4 5, and I'll stop here with double crochets. I've continued on with those double crochets and I have 5 stitches to go. So into that next stitch I'll work an increase, which is 2 stitches worked into 1, and then it's a double crochet into the next stitch, an increase into the next stitch, a double crochet into the next stitch, and an increase into the last stitch. So basically what I've done on this at the start of this round, I've simply copied at the end of the round. So to end the round, it's into the 3rd chain from chain 3, slip stitch to join. Round 5, chain 3, 1 2 3. So for round 5 we're working double crochets all across. Continue with double crochets to the end of the round. I've completed round 5 by slip stitching to join. Round 6, which is an increase round, chain 3, 1 2 3. Into that next stitch we'll work an increase, into the next stitch a double crochet, into the next stitch an increase, and then you'll continue with double crochets to the before the last 3 stitches at the end. I've worked those double crochets and I have 3 stitches to go. Into that next stitch I'll work an increase, into the next stitch a double crochet, into the last stitch I'll work an increase, and into that 3rd chain from chain 3 I'll slip stitch to join. Round 7, chain 3, Here we're working double crochets all across. Continue with double crochets to the end of the round. I've completed round 7 by slip stitching to join, and you'll see already the heel is beginning to take shape. Now before beginning round 8, I need to place stitch markers on either side of my sock. So what I've done is I folded the sock flat with my center running straight down, and on either side I place stitch markers. Now you don't have to be super precise. You don't need to make certain that these amount of stitches are equal to those. It doesn't matter. It's just that to the eye, this looks like it's running straight down the center. And here's my stitch markers on either side. So for round 8, we're changing our stitches, and actually we'll be working all 3 stitches, our double crochet, half double crochet, and single crochets. So we'll begin with a chain 3, and here I'll work double crochets from the start to that stitch marker. I've worked those double crochets to that first stitch marker. The stitch marker, I'll now remove it. Into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, I'll work a half double crochet. Replace that stitch marker into the stitch I've just worked. And then I'll work single crochets to the next stitch marker. I've continued on working those single crochets, and I'm at the next stitch marker. So remove that stitch marker. Into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, work a half double crochet. Replace the stitch marker into that stitch we've just worked, and then you'll continue with double crochets to the end of the round. I've continued on and working those double crochets to the end, and into the third chain from chain 3 I slip stitched to join. I then worked round 9, which was a repeat of round 8, where I had worked chain 3, worked double crochets to the stitch marker. At the stitch marker, into that stitch I worked a half double crochet. Along the front I worked single crochets. At my next stitch marker I worked a half double crochet, and then I worked double crochets to the end. Into the third chain from chain 3 I slip stitched to join. Now you'll see that your heel seems to be getting bigger and bigger as we're working along. Round 10. Round 10 is a decrease round. So it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And here into that first 2 stitches, we'll work a decrease. So a decrease basically is bringing 2 stitches, turning 2 stitches into 1 stitch. So it's yarn over, insert the hook into that first stitch, pull up a loop, insert the hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. That was our first decrease. Then it's a double crochet into the next stitch, a decrease into the next 2 stitches, yarn over, insert the hook into the first stitch, pull up a loop, insert the hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, and then you'll continue on with double crochets to the stitch marker. I'm at the stitch marker. I'll remove that stitch marker. Into that stitch mark by the stitch marker, I'll work a half double crochet. Replace the stitch marker into that stitch I've just worked. Then it's single crochets to the next stitch marker. I've single crocheted my way to the second stitch marker. I'll remove that stitch marker. Into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, I'll work a half double crochet. Replace my stitch marker into that stitch I've just worked. And then I'll work double crochets to 5 stitches before the end. I've continued on working a few more double crochets to 5 stitches before the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So into the next 2 stitches, I'll work a decrease. And then it's a double crochet into the next stitch. And a decrease into the last 2 stitches. Into that third chain from chain 3, I'll slip stitch to join. Round 11, chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Here I'll work double crochets to my first stitch marker. At the stitch marker, I'll work a half double crochet, then it's single crochets to my next stitch marker. At the stitch marker, I'll work a half double crochet, and it's double crochets to the end. I've continued on working round 11, and all I did was chain 3, double crochet to my stitch marker. At the stitch marker, I worked a half double crochet. I then single crochet to the next stitch marker. At the stitch marker, I worked a half double crochet. I then double crochet to the end and slip stitched into the third chain from chain 3 to join. Round 12. Round 12 is another decrease round. We'll chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Into those first 2 stitches, we'll work a decrease. Then it's a double crochet into the next stitch. Into the next 2 stitches, we'll work a decrease. Then it's a double crochet into the next stitch. Into the next 2 stitches, we'll work a decrease. Into that next stitch, I'll work a double crochet. So now I need to explain to you that should you be in a situation where your stitch marker was, let's say, in the stitch, so you just wouldn't work that last double crochet. You go ahead and work your half double crochet, and then it's your single crochets. Okay, so should you find that you're in a different situation as I am, let's say that your stitch marker was here where you needed the one more stitch in order to work that decrease. You'll go ahead and you work your decrease into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, and into the next stitch you work your half double crochet and replace your stitch marker into that new stitch, and then you'll continue with your single crochets. So I hope that makes sense, but that's how you would adjust the pattern if ever you're in a different situation as I am in. Okay, into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, I'll work, oops, I should have taken out the stitch marker. I'll work a half double crochet, and I'll replace the stitch marker into that stitch. I'll then work single crochets to my next stitch marker. I've continued on working those single crochets, and I'm at my second stitch marker. Now, in order to continue on with the decreases, I need 8 stitches before the end. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and my 8th stitch is into my stitch marker. So what I'll do is I'll remove that stitch marker, and I'll go back 1 stitch. So I'll work the half double crochet into that stitch that I just went undid, sort of. So here's my half double crochet into that stitch, replace the stitch marker, and now I have my 8 stitches in order to work the pattern. So into that, the next 2 stitches, I'll work my decrease. Then it's a double crochet. Into the next 2 stitches, a decrease, a double crochet into the next stitch, into the last 2 stitches, a decrease, then into my 3rd chain from chain 3, I'll slip stitch to join. So really you do have to move around your stitch markers in order to be able to work those decreases, because by working decreases we are continuously losing stitches. So that's the reason why we will have to adjust our stitch markers in order to fit the pattern. So you'll work your single crochets, and then if you need to move your stitch marker 1 or 2 stitches in order to work that half double crochet, it's not a train smash. You can go ahead and do it. We'll now move on to the body of the sock, and you'll see that the heel has already taken shape. Here's the heel. If I fold it in half, here's the heel. I've got my heel that's all shaped. So at this point, before moving on to the body, we need to readjust our stitch markers. As you see, they aren't exactly at the sides of my piece. Here's my center running down, so I'll move those stitch markers to the side of my piece. You may have to just move it 1 or 2 stitches to sort of get the alignment right again. Round 13, chain 3. So round 13 is a repeat of round 11. We'll work double crochets to our stitch marker, a half double crochet into our stitch marker, single crochets along the front, a half double crochet into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, and then it's double crochets to the end. So just a repeat of round 11. And you'll continue with your stitch pattern to the end of the round. I've completed round 13 and all I've done was repeat round 11, round 14, chain 3. So here I'm working double crochets to my stitch marker, then it's half double crochets along the front of the sock, and it's double crochets to the end. So it's double crochets to the stitch marker. Then from the stitch marker to the next stitch marker, it's half double crochets. And you'll continue with to the end of the round, working those half double crochets to the next stitch marker, and thereafter it's double crochets to the end. I've continued on and I've worked those double crochets to my stitch marker. Thereafter from stitch marker to stitch marker it was half double crochets and it was double crochets to the end. I then slip stitched into the third chain from chain 3 to join. Now round 15, I've worked round 15 and round 16 and I've just repeated round 14. Round 17, chain. At this point you can remove your stitch markers, you no longer need them. So you'll chain 2, and here we're working half double crochets all across. Continue with half double crochets to the end of the round. I've continued on, and to end round 17 I slip stitched to join. I then repeated round 17 5 more times. So I've worked round 18, round 19, round 20, round 21 and round 22. Just by repeating round 17, and this forms the body of the sock. So you'll work as many rounds of round 17 as need be in order to get to the beginning of the toe of the sock. So once you get there, you'll stop and we'll move on to the toe of the sock. We're now moving on to the toe of the sock. So for me, this is round 23, and it all depends on how many rounds you've worked of that repeat of round 17 for the body of the sock in order to get to the beginning of the toe. Again, for me, it's round 23. Chain 1, and here we're working single crochets all across. But for every round that we work, we're going to skip the first stitch. So into that next stitch, we'll work our single crochet. and then we'll continue with single crochets to the end of the round. Just remember, for every round that we work for the toe, we're skipping our first stitch and working our single crochet into the second stitch, and you will see that like causes the toe part of the sock to taper off. Continue with single crochets to the end of the round. I've continued on with the toe part of the sock, and you can see here that it's like tapered slightly off, and that's only because we skipped the first single crochet for every round. Now I've repeated round 23 and I've done so 11 times in order to complete my sock, and when I fit it on, it ends just over my big toe. For every round, I slip stitched into the first single crochet to join. Okay, now moving on, I fastened off and left behind a long tail, a long enough tail, in order to gather up the stitches to close up this part of the sock. So to gather up, I'll go into each or every second stitch rather, like so. And then you can pull it tightly to close up this end. I'll now move my needle to the wrong side of the sock. And this is where I'll sort of lose my stitches by weaving it in and out of the stitches. Sorry, lose my tail end of the yarn by weaving it in and out of the stitches. You can cut off the excess yarn. All that's left to do now is to weave in the ends, and you'll repeat this whole process in order to make up your set.